Hi everybody, today I'm going to be showing you how to make EQ modulated FM basses, which are a pretty big part of my particular Man from Soul sound. A lot of these techniques are things that other people cover in their own tutorials. I'm not going to be showing anything that's super new. I'm just going to be showing how I personally use it. So it may not be super innovative, but the particulars of how I do it you may find useful. So yeah, I'm going to show you what the sound sounds like right here. Okay, so we are jumping to the future, and we're going to listen to this sound to hear what it sounds like. Okay, so that was from forward in time, so now that we're back in the present, let's actually make it. So let's start off with here. So we're going to start with a patcher. We're going to do all this in patcher. So if you're not familiar with patcher, it just allows you to stack a bunch of stuff and route it however you want in here. So we'll use Sytrus. There you are. So Sytrus, if you're not familiar with it, although if you use FL Studio, you should be familiar with it. It's a FM synth that does a bunch of normal subtractive stuff, and we're going to be using that. So what we're going to set up here is an EQ after it, and then we're going to put a Maximus, another EQ, and then another Maximus. So this is going to be just the basic framework, and then we're going to kind of modify this as we go on. So, I mean, it's just a sine wave right now. So let's drop that down to a lower frequency. So we have a big fat sub. So we're going to take operator 2, and we're going to turn the modulation amount all the way up. And that sounds awful. So we're going to go to the modulation tab here on operator 1. The mod X, we're going to have a linear slope. And so this is 0, this is 100%. So this is controlling how much operator 2 is modulating operator 1. And so with this X knob here, we activate it in patcher. And so now we get to control how much modulation is actually happening. The pitch of operator 2 is at the pitch ratio is at 2, and this is at 0.25, so this is 1, 2, 3 octaves above, so it sounds kind of bad. So sometimes I like to put it on the same octave, so if we put them both at 0.25, that can sound pretty good. For this, I'm going to start it with it at 0.5. And we'll modify that as we go forward. So before we're gonna mess with the harmonics of all these things in a bit, but let's get a bit more of the framework roughed out. So in here we want a single bandpass, just big fat bandpass, and we're going to activate the frequency control for it here in patcher. By the way, when I say activate, it just means right-clicking and activate. That allows you to then input signal into it here in patcher, and I'll show you why that's important in a second. So we have a bandpass, and we're going to be moving it around like this. So then we're going to, in here, in this EQ, I have a preset here, so we want 2 peaks and 2 notches. You can make the peaks as high or as like subtle as you want. These notches, these are straight up cuts, like they're cutting the audio out at their corner frequency. But if you would like, you can also just do 2 peaks that are lower, such like that, so that there's still some of that content. It's not completely cutting it. It's up to you. It's whatever you think sounds best. So we're going to go ahead and activate all 4 of these. Okay. So we have our 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 1. Okay, we'll deal with the maximuses, maximodes. We'll deal with those in a sec. But first, let's make all our knobs here. So we want a couple knobs. We want one for each one of those parameters we activated. So one for the FM, one for the bandpass, one for the first peak, one for the second peak, one for the first notch, and then another one for the second notch. All right, I just like to put them all in a stack like that. So we're gonna, you know what, here, let's go back to editing these. I like to rename them just because the name will show up in the automation clips in the playlist, and it just makes it easier to keep track of what's going on. And so, yeah, let's do that right now. So this is gonna be bandpass. It's gonna be peak 1, peak 2, notch 1, and notch 2. All right, so let's do that. So we're out of editing mode. We're gonna activate every single one of these. And that means, so once they're activated, that means we could then create an automation clip for them, which we'll do in a bit. So route the FM to there, because this X knob is controlling our FM quantity. Bandpass goes there. Peak 1 there. Peak 2 there. Notch 1 and notch 2. Okay, so let's see here. Let's why don't we actually start getting a little bit of sound going here, just so that we can kind of give you an idea of what this is going to sound like. So when you're working with bass sounds, the lowest you can, so I believe the lowest frequency you can go is like, and still have the sub be reproducible on most sound systems, is a low E, because below, I think like 40 hertz, you don't hear anything, and I think E is around that. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. I actually do make a lot of my notes D, because even though if you like lose the sub a bit lower, the rest of the overtones, if it's like thick enough, kind of make up for it. It just kind of depends on the context of your song. So we're just gonna have like a nice EF thing going here. So not much going on, but let's create automation clips for all of these. Come on. So we got FM, bandpass, peak 1, peak 2, notch 1, notch 2. So this is gonna sound really stupid and not very good right off the bat, but pretty quickly we'll be able to make it sound passable, and then we can refine it. So let's just give these some random points. Okay, so here, let's listen to this. Not very good, not very good at all. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna, in Maximus, we're gonna crank all this up. So there's another plugin called OTT that a lot of people seem to use. From what I've seen of it, I can do basically the exact same thing in Maximus, but given that Maximus isn't always free, I can't remember if Maximus is free or not. ImageLine sometimes takes paid plugins and makes them free. And so if Maximus is not free and you don't have access to it, feel free to just use OTT and crank everything up. Otherwise, just do this in Maximus. So we're gonna take every band and we're gonna just like crank that thing up, just doof. And we can adjust some of the particulars of these in a sec. But right off the bat, a little better. It sounds a lot thicker, more fleshed out. What we're doing here is that this whole bandpass thing and then these peaks and notches are a very destructive process. So we're losing a lot of information. But we're more or less bringing it back using this Maximus, but like you still get the movement created by these, these EQs that we're modulating. Like I said, I'm certainly not the first person to invent this strategy. It's been around for a very long time. But kind of one of the important parts is that you want the width of this bandpass to be rather wide, because like all this, all the, I guess, harmonic content that's like even like at this like lower end, it'll be brought back. And so if you make it too narrow, the bass is going to sound too thin because you're like cutting away too much at the beginning. And so you can play with this bandwidth amount and see what you like. Hell, you can even automate it if you want, like if that's your thing. But this still sounds garbage. So we're gonna do some fun stuff back inside Sytrus where we were earlier. We're gonna take the oscillators, or so on the os tab for both of these, we're gonna add some upper harmonic content. What's going on here is that within Sytrus you have a little additive engine. Whatever your waveform is here, you can add more copies of that wave stacked on top of it. And by on top I mean higher in the frequency scale, and this is a harmonic series, and so you have your first harmonic, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, blah blah blah. And doing that, we get more than just two sine waves modulating each other. We get a lot more like interesting content. So even just adding this first harmonic, that helps a lot. So let's add a couple more just around here, and then we'll do the same thing on operator 2. Bada boom, that immediately sounds significantly better. You can do something similar to this in Serum. Serum has a similar additive engine. For FM, I like, for doing this kind of patch, I like Sytrus a lot because you have this entire matrix of frequency modulation that you can take advantage of. And you can do RM modulation too. And sometimes I'll have bases where I'm getting pretty crazy with all the FM stuff in here. And you're able to build a lot of complexity out of just like a handful of oscillators. So let's continue. So this is what we're working with here. So yeah, that's pretty good to start with. What I like to do is here, if we shove another EQ on here at the end. Oops, damn it. I don't know why EQ1 is still in there. Who uses that thing? Where'd it go? Here we go. You can use this to kind of tame, use this as like a final pass to control everything here, or to like kind of sculpt the sound a little more. If you're doing this for the first time, I recommend you stop at this point and you save this as a patcher preset, because you can have a lot of basses that start off this way, and this is just like a very basic framework. That's what I do. I actually have a, it's in there somewhere, I forget which one it is. Oh, there it is, found it. This bandpass peak notch FM framework. And that's, if I were to click that, it'd be basically this. And yeah, it'll save you a lot of time. So let's go juicing this up a little. We're gonna put I'm gonna put a wave shaper in here, give it a little bit more character, put some saturation, maybe a very light. Makes it a little crunchy. That's kind of nice. Here, let's see what we can modify within Sytrus. So we're running through a low pass. Let's give it this phaser filter. This phaser lets you do some fun stuff. So we're gonna activate that cut value, and we're gonna make another knob here. Rename it phaser. Activate it. Create automation clip. Okay. Oh, you know, I was like, why isn't this sounding any different? I didn't actually link it. So it gives a bit more of a formant quality to it, and that's phasers are good for that. So let's actually go back to our FM stuff we're working with here. So we have this up at a 0.5. Let's drop this down to the same octave and see how that sounds. If you offset the frequency a little such that it's not exactly on an even ratio, sometimes you can get some cool kind of phasing effects because they're off kilter with respect to each other. So we have this at roughly 0.5, which is an octave higher than this one. Let's get another oscillator and let's put that one at the same level, so 0.25, and we're just gonna lightly modulate it. Yeah, okay, so adding a little bit of like more FM from something of roughly the same frequency can sound pretty cool too. Let's put this back like up to just something way higher. Yeah, no, that sounds too gross. Let's mess with a little bit of RM. So let's get something that's an entire like 2 octaves above, and we're gonna give a little bit of negative modulation just because we can, and we're gonna again modulate that first one. You know what, that was actually pretty gross. We're gonna take let's take operator 3, which is at the same frequency as our bass oscillator being modulated, and let's use it to slightly modulate operator 2 with it. So we're gonna do a bit of that. So if you are having like a FM chain where you have one operator modulating another one, modulating the first one, you can get like a lot of like really crazy noise on top. Personally, I don't like that sound as much, but if that's your jam, then like please go for it. One thing here, I'm going to take this off real quick. So we're actually gonna you know what? Here, let's take operator 2 off just for a sec, because I like where operator 2 is. Let's put operator 3 back on. I'm gonna put operator 3 at a lot higher. So it's cool because you get a lot of that like upper kind of metallic sounding FM stuff that's typically associated with FM when you have this second one a lot higher, but it's a bit too harsh and too abrasive. So we're gonna do some RM here. Let's take a 4th operator. We're gonna here, where is it? There we go. We're we're gonna use these little modifier things to make something that only has like a really tiny peak to it, just like that. And so RM modulation is, I'm probably gonna get crucified for getting this wrong, but basically it's using one wave to modify the volume or amplitude of another wave, whereas FM is in theory modulating the frequency, but with digital synths that's not actually true. It's actually doing some kind of phase modulation. I'm not the biggest expert on that, but the point is with RM, you're basically modifying the volume. So if for a whole cycle at this frequency, you have, it's only like, you know, activated for a little bit and the value is 0 for the rest of it. This operator 3 that I'm using to modulate operator 1, you're only going to hear it for a bit, or for a very short period in that cycle. So let's take the RM of 4, we're going to RM 3 with it all the way. So here, if we have the tension all the way up, this basically means it's on all the time. This is as if there's basically 0 RM going on, and it sounds like this. And if we take it down a bit, hear how it's a lot less like harsh and notable. So if we take it down a little further, that's basically like we're not doing anything, or it's close to not doing anything. So I'm going to leave it about here roughly, and we're going to turn operator, you know, I just realized, oh no, never mind, we're good, haha, I forgot that we were still in the RM. Okay, so if we're going to turn 2 back on. That was too much. Well, okay, so in this case, it'd be too much to have both of those going at the same time, but, you know, you can do one or the other, however you prefer it. Neat. So that's a good happy medium. I think I'm going to leave it there. One more thing you can do, a neat little trick, is if you turn on some reverb, if you're familiar with seamless R's, or I guess the R is silent, if you're familiar with seamless's bass tutorials, you're probably recognizing a lot of these techniques from his videos. And the reason for that is because I learned them from his videos. I'm just kind of elaborating on the parts that I think are a bit more relevant to my workflow. So I'm going to give credit where credit is due. So he pioneered a lot of this, at least to me. He's the one that put it in video form. So, but anyways, reverb. If we turn on the reverb and put just a little bit, you can get, if you have parts that are, I guess, quieter, or not as, I guess if you have something really high in the spectrum and like your initial bandpass, then you move it lower, the kind of like, you get a bit of like a ghosting effect using like the reverb. It's kind of hard to dial it in exactly, so you want like a shorter reverb. It's most apparent when the initial audio cuts out and there's just a reverb left, because it gets slanted to these maximuses. I don't know what the plural is. That's something to play with. I usually actually don't add reverb this early in the chain. I do some other stuff with it. But ultimately, yeah, this is how to make a really basic FM modulated and EQ modulated bass. As you can see, this really isn't that complex. There's a lot you can do with this. You can add all sorts of different filters. You can You can add you can add a pitch shifter somewhere in here. You can, there's all sorts of, just within Sytrus you could do. Within Maximus, you get a lot of control over how exactly these compression curves look, and you want to take advantage of those to make the sound how you want. There's the sky's the limit. But that's basically how I do it for my stuff. I hope this was informative for you. This is far from the only technique I use for making basses, so I hope to cover some more in the future. Thank you for watching.